Post-fight review, George Groves versus Jamie Cox. 4 round fight, very, very, very exciting fight when it lasted. Not completely dissimilar to the Fedor Chudinov fight, with George Groves finding an answer in round 4. And Groves, I've said this time and time again, Groves has underrated power. You know, Groves is a legit big puncher, and everyone was talking about how tough Jamie Cox was going into this fight. I'm sure Jamie Cox is a very, very, very tough man. But when you go into a fight against someone bigger than you, and you've got very, very limited defence, and they can punch like George Groves can punch, at any time, there's a risk you're going to get stopped. And that's what happened here, kind of against the run of play in the fight. The first minute or two of the fight was quite tentative. The guys were standing at range. Groves was looking to establish his jab. Really, from there on in, it turned into an absolute scrap. The last minute of round 1, rounds 2, 3, the start of round 4, it was a scrap. It was a hard to score scrap. For me, the first round was a definite George Groves round. Rounds 2 and 3 really could have gone either way. Jamie Cox rallied aggressively in the second round. He had a real high output, fast-handed flurry with George Groves up against the ropes. And to be honest, when you watch that back in slow motion, Groves is actually evading a lot of the punches, very little land clean, and Groves is actually working quite well off the ropes. You know, he's countering nicely and that sort of thing. But you kind of got the impression that George Groves was not where he wanted to be. And even though Jamie Cox maybe wasn't landing the crispest, cleanest work on George Groves, you kind of got the impression that George Groves was maybe in a little bit of trouble in there and was potentially in a position in the ring where he didn't want to be. You also kind of got the impression that if the fight continued in this vein for 12 rounds, it would be very, very hard with George Groves and his purported stamina deficiency to fight in such a sort of backyard scrap for 12 rounds. But in the 4th round, and by the time it got to the 4th round, I think most people had it 2 rounds to 1 either way. Very, very close. In the 4th round, Groves finds that shot. He finds the punch to the body, and he drops Cox. And I was very surprised Cox didn't make it up, to be honest. I thought Cox was going to make it up. He actually looked okay another 10, 15 seconds afterwards. So, you know, but if you get caught to the body like that, I guess it can completely wipe you out. And George Groves devastated Jamie Cox with a body shot. Cox goes down. He couldn't make the count. He actually didn't really try to get up. It looked like at about 6 or 7 on the count, he kind of accepted that he wasn't going to be able to make it up. And Groves landed to the body and got Jamie Cox out of there. George Groves is an enthralling guy to watch. He's kind of got an Amir Khan type vibe about his fights, where he's got this complete vulnerability to him. You know, you're watching him, and I thought the same in the Chudinov fight, by the way. You're watching him and you're thinking Groves could easily get beat here. You're looking at him, you're thinking Groves may be up in the scorecard. You're thinking Groves may be the better boxer. You're thinking Groves may be the bigger puncher. But he's kind of got a vulnerability about him, and there's times he looks very uncomfortable in there, and there's times where you just kind of think that he could be on his way to getting beat. And the Eubanks were sitting ringside, both Chris Sr. and Chris Jr., and they were looking at George Groves. And obviously now Groves has been victorious against Cox. He's going to meet Eubank in the semi-final. Both of them coming off early stoppage wins, so, you know, hopefully no injuries. Nothing like that to prevent that fight from happening. And you kind of sense that if Eubank had been able to put George Groves in the positions that Jamie Cox was able to, Groves would potentially have been in even greater trouble. For Jamie Cox, he performed very well in this fight. He actually performed better than I expected, although his lack of defence, which I did highlight in my pre-fight video, did cost him greatly. You'll notice in this fight he's getting countered a lot. He's blocking punches with his chin. Obviously he's got a very, very good chin, but it was that shot to the body that took him out of there in the end. Cox can come again. The performance he put up here in defeat was probably the best performance I've seen from Jamie Cox. He looked better in defeat against George Groves than I've seen him in any of his victories today. There was a snap to his work. He looked dangerous. The way he put punches together on the inside was good. He had fast hands. You got the impression that he could hurt George Groves. So credit to Jamie Cox. He's 31 years old, so you know perhaps he doesn't want to go and be rebuilt and have a load of comeback fights. Perhaps he will want to go straight back into a big fight. Um, Credit goes to Jamie Cox. But essentially, I feel it was too big a step up in class for him tonight. He went straight from fighting at sort of area to English title level, straight through to fighting a guy who's recognised world champion now in George Groves. And some of the deficiencies in his game, some of the lack of experience, for me, was highlighted by George Groves. George Groves, as he's became more experienced, I do think he's got a cool head. I don't think he's as hot-headed as he used to be. There's still a tendency to trade. There's still a tendency to get caught in traps. But I saw him thinking in there. He didn't completely panic. When he was up against the ropes, you could see him looking at Jamie Cox. You could see him looking to evade. You could see him looking to counter. He wasn't completely just leaving his chin up in the air and swinging. He's vulnerable. I think we've got to accept he always will be vulnerable. But there was at least the experience of some of the big fights he's had in the past that showed out, and I do think that was a difference maker in this fight. It wasn't an easy fight for Groves, despite the fact it only went 4 rounds. And with hindsight, you can say that maybe Jamie Cox actually gave Groves a far harder fight than if Groves had picked someone like an Eric Scotland or an Avni Yildirim. Cox seemed to bring out quite a lot more than that from Groves. So Groves goes marching on. It's kind of hard to know what to do with Cox from a form perspective. It's kind of hard to assess how good a win this is from George Groves, because I guess Jamie Cox had brought very little in the way of form in terms of beating recognised fighters with him into this fight. So it's kind of hard to work out just how good a win this is from George Groves. But I guess it's a classic Groves performance, if you like. Strong, but potentially fragile. Now that Eubank fight, I guess that's going to be the major discussion point leading on from this. The more I see of Groves, the more I see of Eubank, the more I think that Eubank is just going to have the style to get Groves out of there. Eubank's going to put Groves in those same uncomfortable positions Jamie Cox did today, but he's going to do it with so much more education. Eubank is increasingly accurate. Eubank puts punches together increasingly spitefully. And I just don't see... I know Eubank's another one of these guys who's got this sort of rumoured toughness about him, but I don't see Groves being able to stop Eubank like he was with Chudinov or like he was with Jamie Cox. Groves is a big puncher. He's got a puncher's chance. He's going to be a bigger man than Eubank Jr. I do think Eubank is a tough style matchup for him. We will, of course, discuss that in other videos. It was actually a good card, this. It was a night of knockouts. Shout out to John Ryder, who stopped Patrick Nielsen, who's the WBA #1 ranked super middleweight. Wow, I don't know if that means John Ryder becomes the WBA #1 off the back of that victory, but huge win, career big win for John Ryder, and that really shows the depth of talent we have in this British super middleweight division. You've got the guys in the tournament. You've got James DeGale, who's arguably the #1 super middleweight. You've got Groves, Smith, Cox, Eubank in the tournament. Below that, guys like John Ryder, Rocky Fielding, Zach Parker, Adam Etches, Darryl Williams, even throw in the sort of old-timers, the Paul Smiths, the Martin Murrays of this world. We've got a lot of talent in this division domestically, and, John Ryder, fair play to him, he's actually improved. I was at his fight against Adam Etches, and he really improved there. He put on a very, very improved showing that night, and he boxed quite well against Rocky Fielding as well, so maybe there's still a few more miles on the clock for Rocky Fielding. I did see Chris Eubank Sr.'s other son, Nathaniel Wilson, getting absolutely wiped out. I think it was inside the first round, although it may have been second round, against a guy who had 2 fights and was from a lower weight class. So, that didn't look too good for Nathaniel Wilson. I understand that he's come to the game fairly late, and you kind of have to wonder what his future is looking like after that fight in terms of the sport of boxing. But yeah, let's round it up with Groves versus Cox. What can I say? Credit to George Groves. A very entertaining fight to watch for when it lasted. Groves' power, size and experience for me made the difference. Jamie Cox can come again. His lack of experience at British and Euro level was to his detriment. And like I said in my pre-fight video, you can be as tough as you want. You can be as hard as you want. But when you're eating punches like that with that limited defense, it's going to cost you on the ground stage. Let me know your thoughts, people. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the thumbs up. As always, take the time to subscribe if you haven't done so before. Do leave your comments how you saw this fight in the section below. Many thanks indeed for tuning in. As always, appreciate you taking the time to watch my videos.